You know, in a courtroom, one single word can literally change a person's life. The difference between freedom and a prison sentence. That's why today we're diving into the incredibly high stakes world of legal Spanish. And trust me, getting the right word isn't just a good idea, it's everything. All right, let's kick things off with a quick pop quiz. Imagine you're in a U.S. courtroom, and the lawyer looks right at you and says, "Present the evidence." What's the Spanish word that pops into your head? Go on, think about it for a sec. Got one?
Okay, so if the word evidencia came to mind, hey, you're in good company. But, and this is a big but, that's actually a huge mistake. And in the legal world, a simple mistake like that can have some really serious consequences. So let's dig into why.
Right, so this brings us to our first section, one word, two worlds. The reason for these mix-ups often comes down to what linguists call false friends. You know, these are words that look or sound almost the same in both languages, but have totally different meanings. And in a legal context, when someone's freedom is literally on the line, getting these right is, well, it's non-negotiable.
Okay, so let's start where every legal case begins, defining the crime. This is so important because how an offense is labeled right from the get-go in Spanish, it basically sets the entire trajectory for what comes next.
So the first big split you have to know is between a misdemeanor and a felony. And in Spanish, it's pretty straightforward, which is nice. A misdemeanor is a delito menor, literally a minor crime. A felony? That's a delito mayor, or delito grave, a major or serious crime. Right there. That one word tells you so much about how serious things are and what kind of punishment could be on the table.
Now here's a classic one that can absolutely change a person's life. We're talking about theft versus robbery. Both involve taking something, right? But the Spanish terms hurto and robo have a critical difference. Hurto is just taking property, but robo, that means you used force or the threat of force. And believe me, that one little detail, the presence of fear or violence, is what separates a lesser charge from a really serious felony.
And it gets even more granular from there. You can have petty theft, hurto menor, or grand theft, hurto mayor, depending on the value of what was taken. But look at some of these other terms. Shoplifting is rapiña. And I love this next one. Burglary is escalamiento. It literally paints a picture of someone scaling a wall to get in. So much more vivid, right? And then you have trespassing, intrusión ilegal, and breaking and entering, allanamiento de morada. Super specific. Okay, here's another one that trips people up all the time. Assault versus battery. In English, we think of assault as the threat and battery as the actual physical contact. In Spanish, it's a little different. Agresión is the threat. That's simple enough. But the term agresión física does some heavy lifting. It can mean just battery, the physical part, or it can mean the whole shebang, the combined assault and battery charge. So one term covers two concepts. All right, so we've got a crime and it's been defined. Now what? Well, the wheels of justice start turning. Let's get into the actual legal process and see how we go from an alleged crime to the courtroom door.
The whole thing usually gets rolling with a warrant, which is an orden de arresto. Makes sense. Then comes the arrest itself. And after that, the very first time a defendant sees the inside of a courtroom is for the arraignment, which in Spanish is called de lectura de cargos.
Let's zoom in on that for a second. Lectura de cargos. It's so cool because it literally translates to reading of the charges. And that's exactly what it is. This is a crucial, fundamental part of the process. It's the moment where the court makes absolutely sure the defendant has heard and understands exactly what they're being accused of. Nothing can happen until that's done. And here we are, inside the courtroom. This is the main event. And it's where the language has to be absolutely perfect. I mean, we're talking about a place where one tiny slip of the tongue could potentially derail an entire case. Okay, I need you to lean in for this one. This right here is probably the single most common and most significant mistake people make when translating legal Spanish. So let's talk about why using the word corte for court is almost always a big mistake. So here's the simple rule to remember. You only use corte when you're talking about a big, high-level court with a bunch of judges like the Supreme Court, the Corte Suprema. For your standard, everyday trial court or the courthouse building itself, the word you're looking for is tribunal. And if you want to get even more specific and talk about the actual room you're in, that's a juzgado. And this idea goes even further. When a judge says, the court finds, they're referring to themselves as el tribunal. But check out what happens when court is used to describe something else. A court order becomes an orden judicial. A court interpreter is an intérprete judicial. See the pattern? The word changes to describe something of the court. It's a neat little grammatical rule that's super important. And we've come full circle, back to our pop quiz from the beginning. So, what's the right word for evidence? It's pruebas. And get this, it's always plural. Why is evidencia so wrong? Because in Spanish, evidencia means something is obvious. It's self-evident. Think about it. That's the complete opposite of what legal proof is. You don't need to prove something that's already obvious. So, the arguments have been made, the pruebas have been shown, and now we get to the end of the line, the verdict and the consequences. And you can bet the language used here is just as critical, because it's what's going to define someone's future. Okay, so if someone is convicted, they might face jail time. But where they go is a huge deal. A cárcel del condado, that's county jail, is usually for people serving shorter sentences for misdemeanors or maybe waiting for their trial. But a penal estatal, or state prison, that's for the serious stuff, convictions for felonies. This is another one people mix up constantly. Probation and parole. Here's the key difference. Probation, or libertad condicional, is a sentence you serve instead of going to jail. It's an alternative. Parole, libertad preparatoria, is when you get an early, supervised release from prison. See the difference? One is instead of, the other is out from. Super important distinction. And let's end this section with a really practical one. How do you actually say someone violated a specific law? Well, you can think of it like building blocks. A violation is a quebrantamiento. A section of the law is called an artículo. And the criminal code is the Código Penal. So you just stack them up. A violation of Section 415 of the Criminal Code becomes un quebrantamiento del artículo 415 del Código Penal. Boom! Sounds like you know what you're talking about. Okay, we have gone through a ton of tricky vocabulary. So let's zoom out. What's the main takeaway here? Why do all these tiny details, all this nuance, matter so much? It really all comes down to this. The number one. One single word. That's all it takes to be the difference between a simple misunderstanding and a full-blown mistrial. And that's the whole point, isn't it? This isn't just some boring grammar lesson. In law, being precise with your words isn't just about sounding smart. It's a core part of justice. Without it, you can't have fairness. So I'll leave you with this to think about. We've seen how high the stakes are in a courtroom, but what about in our own lives? Think about it. In our jobs, in the contracts we sign, even just in our personal relationships. Where else does that one single, perfectly chosen word change everything? Samanichua, thanks for digging into this with me.